So this is my son, Ben, and he agreed to be my very first interview. We're here in his home in Oslo, Norway. Maybe you could just take a minute and say how you ended up here.
Yeah. So I'm Ben. I'm Julie's son. So we share a similar grieving experience. It's my dad and her husband that passed away. I ended up in Oslo because of my wife, Dasha. We met we were serving a mission for a church in Ukraine, and we met there. And what's kind of interesting is you're not supposed to have romantic relations while you're on your mission. So we waited until she left, and we kept in contact. And I visited her, she visited me. It got serious, and it was just easier for me to move over here because of her schooling. She was halfway through medical school here, and it would have been a challenge for her to move to the U.S. and do schooling, get her, do her education there. So I moved here, and now I've lived here for over 4 years. Have a job here, and we have a little boy, so we're pretty settled. Didn't expect it to be in Norway, but it's kind of where I've spent most of my adult years.
That's true. It's where your path took you, right?
Yeah.
You have a really, really sweet, cute little boy, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
So, tell me your perspective, since obviously you're talking about your dad, who is also my husband for 25 years. Tell me like you were sharing it with somebody new who didn't know him.
Yeah. I mean, my dad, or Steve Craig, for those that know him, he had a certain way of being genuine with people around him. He truly cared, even though he was very successful in all the things he did. And I feel like a lot of people maybe in that position wouldn't have showed the same amount of genuineness as he did. He was a really good dad, really cared for us. Remember, he'd always come to whatever sporting events or whatever we had going on at school. He could be very firm, but in a loving way. It seemed like we used to call him Stevepedia or Encyclostevia because he seemed to just know everything. He was a very smart man, and he was a professional in his field. He was a dermatologist and highly regarded, it seemed, by the people around him. So he's just a really solid guy, dry sense of humor, but definitely a guy that you look at and maybe you don't expect him to be as gentle and sweet as he was, but he really was, and I think he had a soft spot for people, especially for kids, and soft spot for people that maybe were less fortunate than him.
I think that's true. Yeah. He did have a dry sense of humor.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun. It was kind of fun. Before people knew him, you didn't really know what to, didn't know how to take him.
Right.
Right? Because he could seem real serious or stern, but he was just kind of a quiet goofball.
Yeah, like you wouldn't expect him to make a joke. All of a sudden he's doing some kind of impersonation, like where he does his old man voice where he says, "Oh, I'm getting old here." If he's waiting in line or something at the store, in a loving way, not
right. He used to call his office, and he would try to make pretend appointments with himself. And,
that's right.
One time he says, "Hello, this is Elmer. Elmer Fudd."
That's right, yeah.
He loves to do that Elmer Fudd voice, and the receptionist goes, Dr. Craig.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So he was silly, but he was very loving. He absolutely loved his kids, all 4 of them.
Oh yeah.
So one of the things that I have been thinking a lot since I've been here visiting you in Norway. I've been here for about 6 weeks.
Right.
And I've been a lot more emotional than I expected to be about your dad, although it doesn't surprise me because I love him so much and I miss him. But it's actually been it's been hard at times to be aware that he's not here interacting with your son.
Right.
How has that affected you?
It definitely has. I mean, that was one of the things I looked forward to the most was seeing him interact with Theo, because I got to see him interact with my nephews, right? His other grandsons, and just the way he interacted was so sweet, and the way he'd say, "What are you doing, little guy?"
I know. I feel the same way.
What you doing?
Right. Like I can hear his voice.
Right. I can totally hear his voice saying that to Theo. I'm sure his presence is there, but that was really hard. I think what was hard for me too is that I never got to meet my Grandpa Craig.
That's true.
And the stories I've heard about my Grandpa Craig make him sound like a legend, like a rough cowboy, like just a good, it almost feels like you could make a poster of him and call him like the rugged American man.
Right. And you're talking about David Craig.
I'm talking about my Grandpa Craig that I never got to meet, who also passed away in his 50s.
Right.
And it's the same for Theo, and he'll grow up hearing these stories about, his grandpa, my dad, which in his own right is also a legend, right?
Exactly.
And it almost makes me afraid of my future, right?
Yeah.
I think that's something that's been difficult is you almost get a little superstitious, like this is a pattern in the Craig family on the men's side.
Right.
54, 56, 57.
Right.
Right? I mean, I try to convince myself that that's not true, but yeah, that's been really hard that he never saw Theo, just because he would have loved Theo so much. Oh yeah. And Theo was such a fun kid that they would have had so much fun together.
I know.
And I think for me too, it's a little bit of identity crisis, because I have what seems like 2 lives. I have the life I lived in the U.S., which I had a good childhood in the U.S., and then when I was 18, I moved to Europe, right? Because I was first on my mission in Ukraine. I did a year of school back in the States, but then I came back here. So my adult life, I've been European, and I almost feel like I'm kind of losing my roots. And I feel like Dad kind of represented that American side for me. I mean, obviously you have that side too, but Dad has like a stronger patriotic personality, I feel like.
Right. Plus he's your dad.
Right.
You're a man who's now a dad.
Right.
And so you're going to relate to your dad.
Right. And it's hard because it's almost like I almost see Grandpa as feeling that this is the culture we're from, Theo. And I don't know if I'll be able to portray it because I've become so Europeanized or whatever. Right. I've become pacified.
That's an interesting perspective.
And I don't know if that's, and which is weird because how important is it really that he learns what it is to be an American, right? Because I'm not even that patriotic. I mean, I think that's probably the whole problem is I'm not that patriotic. That's why I almost want someone else to to take over that role for me.
Maybe that's something that we can work on.
Yeah.
I think one of the ways you do that is you know, you come back, you have visits. As he gets older, it's going to be the exotic thing that this Norwegian kid, goes to America to visit his, his American relatives.
All the American girls will love him.
Oh yeah, they will. Okay, well, so getting back to your experience when you lost your dad, what you were here in Oslo, your dad, we were in the US. What were some of those early thoughts, experiences, feelings? You can go as early as you want, or you can be as vague as you want. It's a very personal thing to talk about. There's the grief that you have that kind of hangs around with you like a backpack that you wear all the time. Mm-hmm. But then even I don't always want to go back to, right after Dad passed away, because I don't like to think about that. It was really hard.
I try also to avoid that, because that probably is the worst. That has to be the worst moment in my life, or one of them. And Dad had always been, when I was 10, 11, he got very sick, and for about 1.5 years, he didn't have a diagnosis. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And that was a time, and I couldn't really understand. I think when I was 10 or 11, I knew Dad was sick. Somehow I always had some hope or optimism or encouraging spirit with me during that time. I didn't actually think he was going to die, but I understood that was definitely a possibility. So it was hard to comprehend at that age.
Right.
I knew that he was sick. And even when we were in the Mayo Clinic and he had a brain biopsy, I think if I had gone through that right now, that would have been completely different emotionally than as a kid. But I remember just, I would just be at football practice and my coach would be like, "Hey, how's your dad doing?" I think he's doing okay. I don't know. Right. People would bring us over treats, and I guess as a kid you really don't understand. But now, I definitely wouldn't want to be in that position with, I guess, my knowledge now and my age. So he had been very sick before, and after that he got to a stable. He got to a point where his health was stable, but I mean he had to go in for infusions for a certain medicine, and he wasn't the same. He was always very healthy. He was very conscious about his health.
Well, he was an athlete.
He was an athlete, and he had always been conscious about his health, and but it was different. I never really saw him do very exerting activities. Right. Whereas before, maybe he'd actually play like basketball or whatever.
Right.
But he would get his steps in. He would walk.
Right.
He'd do his little routine with his, his dumbbells. He'd watch his health. When it was Christmas time, people would give us all kinds of treats. The neighbors or our friends, and if you weren't quick with getting your treats, he'd take that plate and he'd either hide it or he'd throw it away. And so he was always very adamant about taking care of his body. But then again, he did have a chronic illness, even though it was in check. It was stable. So we kind of always lived with that, and that was something that we kind of forgot about at some point.
That's how I feel about it. He was so stable, but he was stable as a person, right? As a person, he didn't have big, highs or lows. No. And he was so stable that you almost forgot that he was sick. Right.
And you almost forgot that he was a person with flaws. Mm-hmm. Obviously he had flaws, but when it came to being stable, he was always stable. When you'd freak out about something, he'd be like, "Okay, let's take a look at this. Let's calm down," right? Mm-hmm. And so later, I remember he had some episodes where I didn't really recognize him.
Right.
I guess before all this happened, he did tell me that he was diagnosed with a type of leukemia that was a slow burner, and this was devastating at the time, and I cried, and he cried when he told me, but then I had more optimism because he had at least 10, 15, even 20 years left.
Yeah, and when he as a physician tells you it's a slow burner and he's not too worried about it, although he might have said that to you, he actually was, could be a little bit of a hypochondriac. He was always worried about everything about his health, but he didn't.
He was a worrywart.
But he didn't always portray that to others.
He was very private about those kind of things too in his health in general.
Oh yeah.
But and so there was that, but we assumed that he would live another at least 15, 20 years just because he took care of himself well, and we already thought that he wasn't going to live until he was 80 just because of his history, but we thought at least 65, 70. So then, and then later there were some episodes where he didn't seem like himself.
Mm-hmm.
And we're pretty sure that his old sickness came back, and ultimately that's what he passed away from, is what we believe. But I remember those episodes where there's really only a couple times where my dad, who's usually so calm and so good at really listening to you, he was a good listener. I remember trying to talk to him about this car that we had purchased, and he's a car guy, right? Something he'd love to hear about,
Yeah.
And it was weird how he wasn't asking the normal questions he was asking, right? Like, did you get a good deal? Did you really give the seller a run for his money?
Right.
Is it an automatic? Is it a manual? The stuff that he'd usually ask, but he just kind of wasn't present, and he was worried about something at work.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very weird. And then maybe a month or two later, I had just finished an exam at school, and the time difference, because he passed away at night, the time difference, right? I'm 9 hours ahead, so I had just taken an exam. I was done with that. That in itself was stressful, and then I get the call that he had passed away, and it came as a shock. And no one was expecting it.
But I think we called Dasha first, right?
Yeah. You called Dasha, and poor
That's
Dasha.
your wife?
Yeah, my wife Dasha, and she didn't know. When she got the phone call, I could tell that it was serious. And then she told me the news, and I just yelled, and it was one of those, like, is this real? Am I in a dream? And I just completely I didn't know what to do with myself.
Like something primal that you couldn't control?
Yeah, it was something I couldn't control. I yelled and screamed, and it was crazy. And it was an awful feeling. And thankfully I was able to, and then right then we got tickets, and this was during COVID, so I had to, like, not only did I have to buy a ticket last minute, I also had to go into the Oslo to get a rapid COVID test, and there's only like one place that does it. I had to do that day, and thankfully I had a friend that came and met me and kept me company, and we ate junk food and played some video games, and that was really really nice. But
I want to really focus on that for a second.
Yeah.
Tell me about how that came about, that you had a friend. Did he come to you? Did you go to him? How did this happen that you had somebody who stayed with you? Just share more of that in detail.
Yeah, this was Jacob Hugseth, which honestly, when I came here, I didn't really have a lot of friends. All of my friends were Dasha's friends, and I really appreciated having that circle of friends and that group. And it was nice that I came here to this new country, and I never really felt like it was that hard to get used to things because of that. But it's still not the same. So he was really the only person that we actually hung out on a, friend to friend basis, not a friend of your spouse basis.
Right.
And so when that happened, I think it was Dasha that suggested that he come over, and I'm still very grateful to him to this day. And he was definitely in the right place at the right time. And I think...
What did he happen to be doing, do you know?
I don't know what he was doing, but I think that's one of those things where people, when something tragic happens, people want to just ask you, is there anything I can do? I understand that the intentions are good, mm-hmm. but you don't really need that. You're not in the ability to make decisions for yourself. So you need someone that will just do something. So he just came over, he brought his Xbox, we played FIFA, he brought a bunch of junk food, we just ate some junk food, played FIFA, and I was able to get my mind off things, and that was really nice. So I guess, and there are other examples. I wish I could come, I wish they came to mind now, but I think that's one of those things that if someone is really grieving, just do something without their permission.
Just show up.
Or if someone, or ask someone that's really close that understands what they really need. Obviously, I'm so sorry for your loss. If there's anything I can do, let me know. But no one's ever going to tell you that they can do something.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Back from the break. You want to ask me a question?
Yeah. So now coming to the present, do you experience certain triggers that bring back waves of grief?
I think the weird thing about the grief with my dad is that I was devastated that I lost him, and I'm angry that he's not here with me. And I really wish he was here. After the initial week where I am grieving, I never really felt like I was grieving. Mm-hmm. And that was really weird because I almost felt guilty that I wasn't more sad or messed up. Mm-hmm. But yeah, because I think outwards towards people, it seemed like I was doing all right, I was strong, and I felt like I kind of had to be, because I felt like I kind of played a role in kind of being the glue in the family for a little bit.
It's true.
But a couple of years later is when I had my first panic attack, and I have never struggled with anxiety or had panic attacks ever before. And I seriously thought I was going to die. And it came kind of out of nowhere. It was triggered by a friend whose sister had died. Wow. And she was young. And I think that opened up a whole box of me being afraid to die young, me being afraid of dying of a stupid death, which I also, I feel like my dad's death was a stupid death. Just that stuff in general. And I seriously thought I was going to die. I had never hurt psychologically that much that it hurt physically. And growing up when people struggle with mental health, I understood there was a problem, but I kind of just assumed that, okay, you'll be okay, just, toughen up. But that, and then I really understood, like, whoa, because I could not function. I even tried, I could not function. I called in sick basically to work and said, I'm not going to be there today, or maybe tomorrow. And then thankfully it was the weekend. But then I tried coming in on Monday. I was able to take the train there. And as soon as I got there, I broke down and started crying, and had to basically do that in front of my superiors, and that wasn't fun. How did they react? And they reacted very well. And they said, just take the time that you need, and it's going to be okay. So I'm very grateful for how they reacted, and thankfully it was Christmas break soon. So I basically just got time off until Christmas break, went home, and saw my family in the States and kind of got back to a more normal state. But it did take a little time, and I had a couple more episodes. It weren't nearly as bad as that first panic attack, but a couple more. I started talking to a psychologist. And I still am working through it, and I don't really understand what happened. I haven't really had that kind of thing, that level of anxiety since then, but I still get anxious, especially about something happening to me, something happening to Dasha or my son Theo. So I get certain triggers, maybe not necessarily about my dad, but I think that has kind of caused this general anxiety and fear of death. And I think I went so long without actually really processing the feelings because I seem to be doing fine. I'm not really grieving, but I think there was a lot happening underneath that I didn't realize.
So because it was bubbling under the surface, but you looked like you were doing well on the outside, would you call that healthy grieving?
No, I guess not. And what was weird about it is that I don't know. I guess I never actively tried to grieve healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I just assumed that I was in a very unfortunate situation. Of course, I'm going to be affected and scarred from this, but I'm doing okay. I'm going to get through this. Life is challenging. Yeah, I would love to call my dad and ask about this and this because he's a well of knowledge and he's my dad and I love him. Okay, I guess I just don't have that luxury in life anymore. But it never really affected me on such a deep personal level until then. And I still don't know if it's all because of my dad or there were a lot of changes in my life during that time. We had bought a house. We had a baby on the way, or we had a baby at that point. I started a new job, finished school, so there was a lot happening. So I think it's all interconnected. But yeah, I think the initial trigger was with my dad.
So I don't know if you could fast forward and say Theo is sitting in front of you as a grown man, and obviously you'll have a lot more life experience then, but what would you approach? What would you say to him if he went through something really hard and couldn't quite process it? What would you suggest? What have you learned that you feel like you could share with your son?
Yeah, I think what's hard is in those situations, there's not really anything I felt very powerless, but I think there are simple things that would help me, and a lot of times they're more practical things like just breathing exercises or just getting out, forcing yourself to go outside, go on a walk, do something that keeps you a little busy until you can really work through these things, because you can't really work through these emotions you can't understand while you're going through them. It doesn't work. I mean, if someone is suicidal, it's not like you're going to say, okay, let's get you into a counselor right now. I mean, I guess, yeah, at some point you need to, but really that person just needs to get to a stable place first. Right. And so I think, yeah, I guess I would try to focus on him getting through that terrible period, because it really does come in waves, but eventually it does kind of go away and time heals, and it kind of comes back again every once in a while. But it eventually, you really do get through things, and you really do have to give yourself time. And in the meantime, you just have to find those small things that make it bearable for just enough time. So that's how I felt during those panic attacks, that I just had to barely survive. It was the weirdest feeling because I had suicidal thoughts, but I had no intention, plans, or desire to take my life.
Right. You just wanted to stop.
Yeah.
Stop being.
I had
existing.
No fantasies about doing it.
Yeah.
Didn't want to do it, but I just couldn't live. It was
right.
It was very painful. It's so hard to describe. But since then I do get that, those panicky moments, and I just have to remind myself to breathe and slow down, and yeah.
What role has your faith played in either your preparation to go through something hard or your ability to work through something hard?
Yeah, I feel like, I wonder if someone else said this, but I also use this analogy that faith is kind of like insurance. It kind of sometimes isn't that fun making the monthly or yearly payments. I don't want to have to pay another bill for house insurance, but if something happens to the house, I'm gonna need that insurance. So I feel like that's kind of how it is with faith, where I know a lot of people find daily joy in the gospel, and I do too, but not in the same way. I think it's a little bit of a daily struggle for me.
Mm-hmm.
But when you really need it, you really need it, and I don't care who you are. Once all other alternatives, once you've gone through all other alternatives, and you're still in that position that you are, no matter who you are, I think you end up saying a prayer to whatever it is that's up there that you believe, or yeah. So I think that's how it is, where you don't really have anything else at that point because life has failed you.
Right.
So there's not really anything to find peace in.
Right. You're going to have to seek something that you cannot see or touch.
You're going to have to get it from a higher power, and it's weird how you might not even feel that influence in any other part of your life, but you can feel it then.
Thank you. Are there any scriptures or quotes or anything that came to you during, like, anything that you said, wow, this is my rock, or is it, or has it been different for you?
For a while, no. During one of the last panic attacks or whatever, I don't know what quote this is from or where it's from, but this too shall pass. I just really like that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say it's like a Persian proverb or something like that.
This too shall pass.
This too shall pass. And it really does, even though it doesn't feel like it's going to.
Right, because your circumstances aren't. The circumstances that you have lost someone and you miss them and your life is upended,
right,
is constant, but the pain you're feeling in that moment will pass.
Yeah.
So to wrap it up, and thank you very much for sitting here and you were the,
and grieving with you.
Yes, well, being my first interview, you were the first baby I ever had, and now you're my first interview.
Oh, that's right.
Lots of firsts. What do you think it means to grieve well?
I guess we're all trying to figure that out still, huh? Yeah, I guess for me, maybe surface level, it looked like I was grieving well, which I think in a lot of people's minds mean I wasn't grieving, right? Because that may be how it appeared, is that I was doing okay. So I think grieving well is being honest with yourself and maybe going through some extra steps that you don't think are necessary to make sure that you are taking care of yourself, because I didn't expect to be in such bad shape psychologically as I was, but I don't really think I was doing anything actively to grieve. And maybe I thought that grieving was more like pain, where you, I mean, you can take medicine or whatever, but you kind of just have to wait for it to pass. Whereas grief, I think, is probably more of an active process, or an active and an ongoing process where you have to invest time and energy into your own process, however that looks.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That is a way of looking at it that's going to stick with me. I'm going to be thinking about that for a little bit. I like how you said it's being honest with yourself and really seeing how you're doing. That is grieving well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Ben. I appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.